It was a cold, stormy night in Wyoming. Ruth Calloway, a poor widow trying to survive on her little farm, saw a young boy sitting alone in the rain outside her cabin. He was freezing and scared. Ruth quickly brought him inside, gave him food, and wrapped him in a blanket. That boy couldn't remember much, just that his father owned land near a place called Red Creek Valley. The only thing he carried was a small leather pouch. The next morning, Ruth took him to town for help, but instead of thanking her, the townspeople yelled at her and told her to leave. Ruth didn't know that the boy's father was William Bradford, the most powerful man in the territory. It was a night carved from cold and fury. Rain hammered down across the Wyoming territory like heaven itself had cracked open, flooding the narrow dirt roads that snaked through Red Creek Valley. The wind howled through the pine trees, bending them low, and the few scattered homesteads that dotted the valley sat dark and silent, their people huddled inside, waiting for the storm to pass. Most folks had locked their doors hours ago. The saloon had emptied early. Even the stray dogs had found shelter beneath porches and wagon beds. It was the kind of night where survival meant staying put, keeping warm, and minding your own business. Out here, that was the rule, but Ruth Calloway had never been good at minding her own business when it came to suffering. She stood at the window of her small cabin, a cup of weak tea cooling in her hands, watching the rain beat down on the land she'd fought to keep. The cabin wasn't much, one room with a loft, a stone fireplace that smoked when the wind turned wrong, and walls that creaked like old bones. But it was hers, or at least it had been hers and Samuel's. Samuel had been gone 3 years now. Fever took him quickly, left her with nothing but debts, a plot of stubborn land, and a name that carried more pity than respect. In Red Creek Valley, a woman alone was either a burden or a target. Ruth had become both. She was 32, though the territory had a way of aging people faster. Her hands were rough with hard work, her face sun-worn, her dark hair streaked with gray that she didn't bother hiding. She wore a plain cotton dress patched at the elbows and boots that had belonged to Samuel, still too big, but they kept her feet dry. The townspeople barely put up with her. Beatrice Harlow, who ran the trading post with an iron fist and a sharper tongue, made sure Ruth knew her place. A widow ought to remarry or move on, Beatrice had said more than once, loud enough for others to hear. Ain't natural, a woman trying to work a man's land alone. Ruth had smiled tightly and paid for her flour in silence. She'd learned long ago that defending herself only made things worse. Tonight, she should have been asleep. Her body ached from hauling water, mending fences, and chopping enough wood to last the week. But something pulled her to the window, a feeling maybe, the kind her mother used to call a whisper from the Lord, and that's when she saw him. A small figure, barely visible through the sheets of rain, stumbling along the trail that passed near her property. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow, a branch. But then the figure fell, caught itself, and kept moving. Ruth's heart jumped. She set down her tea, threw Samuel's old coat over her shoulders, and grabbed the lantern from the hook by the door. The rain hit her like a slap the moment she stepped outside, soaking through the coat in seconds. The mud sucked at her boots as she hurried down the trail, lifting the lantern high. "Hey!" she called out, her voice nearly lost in the storm. "Hey, stop!" The figure turned. A boy, no older than 10, drenched to the bone, his clothes hanging off him in tatters. His face was pale, lips blue, eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. He didn't run. He just stood there, swaying like he might collapse. Ruth closed the distance quickly, dropping to her knees in the mud. "Lord, have mercy," she breathed. "What are you doing out here, child?" The boy didn't answer. He just stared at her, shivering violently. She didn't hesitate. She wrapped the coat around him, lifted him, lighter than he should have been, and carried him back toward the glow of her cabin. Behind them, the storm raged on. The valley remained dark and silent. No one else had seen. No one else had stopped. But Ruth Calloway had, and by morning, that single act of kindness would bring trouble to her door. Inside the cabin, Ruth moved with quiet speed. She set the boy down near the fireplace, added 2 more logs to the flames, and stirred the embers until they roared back to life. Heat began to fill the small space, pushing back the cold that had seeped into the walls. The boy sat without moving, water pooling beneath him on the wooden floor. His teeth chattered so hard Ruth could hear them over the crackling fire. His clothes were little more than rags, a torn shirt, pants that didn't fit, one boot missing entirely. Mud caked his bare foot, and his hair hung in dark, wet tangles across his forehead. Ruth grabbed a blanket from the loft and wrapped it around his shoulders, tucking it tight. "You're safe now," she said softly, crouching in front of him. "I'm not going to hurt you." The boy's eyes flicked to hers, then away. He didn't speak. She studied him for a moment. Pale skin, hollow cheeks, the empty look of someone who hadn't eaten in days. But there was something else, too. Despite the dirt and desperation, his clothes, torn as they were, had once been nice. The stitching was tight, the fabric good quality. This wasn't a child born to poverty. "Can you tell me your name?" Ruth asked gently. Nothing. She tried again. "Do you know where you came from? Where your folks are?" Still nothing. Just that haunted stare. Ruth exhaled slowly and stood. "All right. Let's get you warm first. Then we'll figure the rest out." She moved to the small stove in the corner and ladled out a bowl of stew she'd made earlier, mostly potatoes and carrots, a little bit of salted pork. It wasn't much, but it was hot. She placed it in the boy's hands, wrapping his cold fingers around the bowl. "Go on," she urged. "Eat." He looked down at the stew like he didn't believe it was real. Then, slowly, he lifted the spoon. The first bite seemed to break something inside him. His shoulders shook, and for a moment, Ruth thought he might cry. But he didn't. He just ate, fast and desperate, like someone who'd forgotten what food tasted like. Ruth turned away to give him privacy, busying herself with building up the fire and laying out dry clothes. An old shirt of Samuel's that she'd kept, far too big for the boy. But it would do. When she turned back, the bowl was empty, and the boy was staring at her again. This time, his eyes were different, less afraid, more searching. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice small. Ruth's chest tightened. "You're welcome, sweetheart." A long silence passed. The storm outside had softened to a steady drumming against the roof. Inside, the fire popped and hissed. Finally, the boy spoke again. "My name's Tommy." Ruth smiled gently. "Tommy, that's a good name." "I'm Ruth." He nodded, gripping the blanket tighter. I got lost." I was trying to find my pa. Where's your pa? I don't know. His voice cracked. He went away. Said he had business, but he didn't come back. And the men. He stopped, his face twisting with something Ruth couldn't quite read. Fear, maybe, or shame. What men, Tommy? The ones who came to the house. They said my pa owed them. They took things. They told me to leave. His hands trembled. I didn't know where to go. So I walked. I thought maybe I could find him. Ruth's jaw tightened. She'd seen it before. Men with power taking what they wanted, leaving the broken pieces behind. It was the way of things out here. The strong ate the weak, and the law rarely cared. Do you know your pa's name? She asked carefully. Tommy reached into his soaked shirt and pulled out a small leather pouch, worn and cracked. He opened it with shaking hands and pulled out a folded piece of paper, brittle and damp. He handed it to Ruth Dot. She unfolded it gently. It was a land deed, faded ink, official stamps, and at the bottom, a name she recognized immediately. William Bradford. Ruth's blood ran cold. Everyone in the territory knew that name got Ruth stared at the name on the deed, her mind racing. William Bradford, the most powerful man in the Wyoming territory, owner of the Iron Ridge Ranch, thousands of acres stretching across the valley and beyond. A man whose word could make or break entire towns, whose cattle filled the rail cars headed east, whose money greased every wheel that turned in Red Creek Valley. Dot. And this boy, this cold, frightened, half-starved boy sitting by her fire, was his son? She looked up at Tommy, who was watching her with worried eyes. He seemed to sense her hesitation, the way her face had shifted from warmth to something harder to read. You know him? Tommy asked quietly. Ruth chose her words carefully. I know of him. Everyone does. Is he? Is he bad? The question caught her off guard. She folded the deed back up and handed it to him. I don't know him personally, Tommy, but if he's your pa, then we need to get you back to him. Relief washed over the boy's face, but it was mixed with something else. Doubt maybe, or fear of what he'd find when he got there. Ruth stood and moved to the window, pulling back the thin curtain. The rain had slowed to a drizzle now, the worst of the storm passing over. Dawn was still hours away, but she knew she wouldn't sleep. Not with this weight sitting on her chest, that William Bradford's son. In her cabin, wearing her dead husband's shirt. If the townspeople found out, they'd have questions. If Bradford found out his son had been here, he'd have questions too. And Ruth had learned long ago that questions from powerful men rarely ended well for women like her. But what choice did she have? She couldn't turn the boy out, and she couldn't keep him here without word getting around. She turned back to Tommy. Have you eaten enough? He nodded. Double quotes. Good. Now, let's get you into dry clothes, and then you're going to sleep. In the morning, we'll go into town. Someone there will know how to reach your father. Tommy's face darkened. The town? They won't help. Why not? Because they didn't before. His voice was bitter, older than his years. When the men came, I ran to town first. I asked at the saloon, the trading post. Nobody would listen. They said I was lying. Said a Bradford boy wouldn't be dressed like a beggar. He looked down at his torn clothes. They chased me off. Ruth's stomach turned. She could picture it perfectly. Beatrice Harlow sneering at a desperate child, Vernon Price shooing him away like a stray dog. They'd probably laughed about it after. She knelt in front of him again, her voice firm. Then we'll make them listen. How? Because I'll be with you. And because this time, we'll have proof. She pointed to the deed. That paper says who you are. They can't ignore that. Tommy didn't look convinced, but he nodded anyway. Ruth helped him change into the oversized shirt and a pair of old trousers she cinched tight with a rope belt. Then she made a small bed for him on the floor near the fire, layering blankets until it was soft and warm. He curled into it without protest, exhaustion finally taking over him. Within minutes, he was asleep. Ruth sat in the rocking chair Samuel had built, watching the boy's chest rise and fall. Her own exhaustion pulled at her, but her mind wouldn't settle. She thought about the morning, about walking into town with Tommy at her side. She thought about the looks she'd get, the whispers, the accusations that would follow. Widow Calloway playing savior again, always sticking her nose where it don't belong. What'd she want with a Bradford boy anyway? She could already hear them. But then she looked at Tommy, small, vulnerable, alone, and she knew none of that mattered. He was a child, and he needed help. That was enough. As the fire burned low and the first hints of gray dawn began to creep through the window, Ruth made her decision. Tomorrow, she'd take him to town. She'd find someone who could get word to William Bradford, and she'd make sure this boy got home safe, no matter what it cost her. The morning came with a pale sky that couldn't decide whether to clear or darken again. Ruth woke Tommy gently, fed him the last of her bread with butter, and prepared herself for what was coming. She dressed in her cleanest dress, still worn, still patched, but respectable. She braided her hair tight and pinned it up, then helped Tommy wash his face and hands in the basin. He looked better now, less like a ghost. But the clothes he wore still marked him as someone who didn't belong to anything. Ready? She asked. He nodded, clutching the leather pouch close to his chest. They set out on foot, Ruth's horse having gone lame the week before. The walk into Red Creek Valley took nearly an hour, their boots squishing through the mud. Tommy stayed close to her side, his eyes darting around like he expected something to jump out at them. The town was waking up when they arrived. Smoke rose from chimneys. The blacksmith's hammer rang out in steady rhythm. A wagon rattled past, the driver tipping his hat to Ruth out of habit, then doing a double take when he saw the boy. Ruth felt the shift immediately, eyes turning, conversation stopping mid-sentence, doors opening just a crack, faces peering out. By the time they reached the center of town, a small crowd had begun to gather. Ruth led Tommy straight to the trading post, Beatrice Harlow's territory. If anyone could get word to the Bradford Ranch, it was her. The woman had connections everywhere, and she loved knowing things before anyone else did. The bell above the door chimed as they entered. Beatrice stood behind the counter, arranging jars of preserves with the precision of a general organizing troops. She was a tall woman, severe-looking, with silver hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her face. Her eyes were sharp and cold. She looked up when they entered, and her face soured immediately. "Ruth Calloway," she said flatly. "Didn't expect to see you today." "Morning, Beatrice." Ruth kept her voice steady. "I need your help." Beatrice's gaze slid to Tommy, and something flickered across her face. Recognition, then suspicion. That the boy who came through here yesterday Begging for scraps? He wasn't begging, Ruth said. He was looking for help. Well, he didn't find it. Beatrice crossed her arms. Told him we don't serve vagrants. Told him to move along before the deputy ran him off. Tommy's hand tightened around Ruth's. He's not a vagrant, Ruth said firmly. His name is Tommy Bradford. His father is William Bradford of Iron Ridge Ranch. The store went silent. Even the two customers browsing in the back stopped and turned. Beatrice's eyes narrowed. That so? Ruth nudged Tommy forward gently. Show her. Tommy hesitated, then pulled out the leather pouch and handed the deed to Beatrice. She snatched it, unfolded it with sharp movements, and scanned the paper. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Could be stolen, she said coldly. It's not stolen, Ruth said. He's been lost for days. His father needs to know he's safe. Beatrice handed the deed back with a sneer. And you just happened to find him? How convenient. I found him on the road last night in the storm. I gave him shelter. That's all. That's all? Beatrice's voice dripped with mockery. She leaned forward, her tone sharpening. Let me tell you what I think, Ruth. I think you saw an opportunity. A widow with nothing, struggling to hold on to land she can't manage, suddenly shows up with a boy claiming to be William Bradford's son. She paused for effect. Mighty suspicious timing, don't you think? Ruth's jaw tightened. I'm not claiming anything. He told me who he is. I'm just trying to help. Help yourself, more like. That's not. The door swung open with a bang, and Vernon Price strode in, Beatrice's son, the deputy. He was a thick-shouldered man with a badge that gave him more authority than sense. He looked at Ruth, then at Tommy, and his hand moved automatically to the gun at his hip. Got a problem here, Ma? Beatrice smiled thinly. Just a woman who don't know her place, Vernon. Thinks she can waltz in here with some street urchin and spin tailies about the Bradfords. Vernon stepped closer, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. That true, Ruth? You trying to cause trouble? Ruth stood her ground, pulling Tommy slightly behind her. I'm trying to reunite a lost boy with his father. By bringing him here? To my mother's store? Vernon's voice rose. You got some nerve. I have proof. Proof of what? That you picked up a dirty kid and put ideas in his head? He looked down at Tommy with disgust. Bradford's boy wouldn't be dressed like that. Wouldn't be wandering around alone. He was lost. Or you're lying. The words hit like a slap. Ruth felt the heat rise in her chest, but she kept her voice level. I have no reason to lie, don't you? Vernon stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. You're barely scraping by out there on that patch of dirt. Everyone knows it. Maybe you figured if you could get close to the Bradfords, make yourself useful, there'd be something in it for you. That's not what this is. Then what is it? Beatrice cut in, her voice sharp as a blade. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a desperate woman trying to climb her way out of the mud by using a child. The other customers murmured in agreement. Ruth could feel the room turning against her, the weight of judgment pressing down from all sides. Tommy's voice broke through, small but defiant. She's telling the truth. She found me. She gave me food and a place to sleep. She didn't ask for anything. Vernon looked down at him with cold amusement. And who are you supposed to be, boy? Tommy Bradford. His voice shook, but he didn't look away. My father owns Iron Ridge Ranch, and when he finds out how you treated me—" "Enough," Vernon snapped. He turned back to Ruth. "You've got about 10 seconds to take this boy and leave before I arrest you for disturbing the peace." "Arrest me?" Ruth's voice rose despite herself. "For trying to help a lost child? For causing a scene? For wasting our time? For—" He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low growl. "For forgetting your place, Ruth Calloway." The door opened again, and more townspeople filtered in, drawn by the commotion. Among them was old Pete from the saloon, his weathered face creased with concern, and Sarah May, a young woman who'd always been kind to Ruth at Sunday services. Beatrice seized the moment, raising her voice so everyone could hear. "This woman," she announced, pointing at Ruth like she was evidence in a trial, "brought this filthy child into my store, claiming he's William Bradford's son. Now we all know the Bradfords. We know what they look like, how they carry themselves." She looked at Tommy with unveiled disgust. "Does this look like Bradford blood to you?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some shook their heads. Others whispered behind their hands. "She's using him," someone said from the back. "Always knew she was trouble," another voice added. These tales of courage and kindness deserve to be remembered. Like the video, if you believe, West still has lessons to teach us. Ruth felt the walls closing in. Her hands trembled, but she forced them still. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. "I know what you all think of me," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "I know you think I don't belong here, that I should have left when Samuel died, that a woman alone is either weak or dangerous." She looked around the room, meeting their eyes one by one. "But I have never lied to any of you, and I'm not lying now." "Then prove it," Vernon challenged. "Where's your proof that this boy is who he says he is? The deed could be stolen, could be forged." He crossed his arms. "Got anything else?" Tommy stepped forward, his voice stronger now. "I can tell you things about the ranch, about my father, things only someone who lived there would know." Vernon laughed. "Anyone could have heard stories and repeated them. That don't prove nothing, boy." "Then send word to the ranch," Ruth said firmly. "Let William Bradford come here and see for himself." "Oh, we'll send word, all right," Beatrice said with a cold smile. "We'll send word that a widow woman is trying to pass off some stray as his son. See how that goes for you?" The crowd laughed. Ruth felt Tommy press against her side, his small body rigid with humiliation and fear. "This is wrong." Sarah May's voice cut through suddenly. She stepped forward, her young face flushed with emotion. "You're all being cruel. What if she's telling the truth? What if he really is lost?" "Stay out of it, girl," Beatrice snapped. "No." Sarah May looked at Ruth, then at Tommy. "I remember him. He came into town yesterday, soaking wet, asking for help. I saw him." She turned to the crowd. "We all saw him, and we did nothing." Old Pete nodded slowly. "She's right. I saw the boy too. Didn't think much of it at the time, but nothing," Vernon interrupted. "You stay out of this, Pete." "I'm just saying, maybe we ought to," I said, "stay out of it." Vernon's hand moved to his gun again, and the room went deathly quiet. Ruth's heart pounded. This was getting out of control. She put a protective hand on Tommy's shoulder. ready to pull him toward the door if necessary. But before she could move, the sound of hoofbeats thundered outside, many of them. Coming fast, the entire room froze. Through the window, Ruth saw them, a dozen riders, maybe more, surrounding the trading post. Dust rose in clouds around their horses. They wore dark coats, wide-brimmed hats, and gun belts that caught the morning light. And at the front, on a massive black horse, sat a man who could only be one person. William Bradford had arrived. The door to the trading post didn't open. It exploded inward. William Bradford stepped through like a force of nature, his boots striking the wooden floor with the authority of thunder. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his dark hair, and a face carved from stone and determination. His coat was long and fine, dusty from hard riding, and his eyes, sharp and piercing, swept the room like a hawk, searching for prey behind him. His foreman, Marcus Stone, filled the doorway, hand resting on his gun. The other riders remained outside, a silent wall of muscle and steel. The entire room seemed to shrink. Beatrice recovered first, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Bradford, what a surprise. We weren't expecting. Where is my son?" His voice cut through the air like a whip crack. No pleasantries, no introduction, just raw, desperate urgency. Beatrice's smile faltered. "Your son?" "I." "We haven't." Bradford's eyes found Tommy. Time stopped. The boy stood frozen beside Ruth, his face pale, his small hand clutching the leather pouch. For a moment, neither moved. Then Tommy's lips trembled, and a single word escaped. "Pa?" Something broke in William Bradford's face, a dam bursting after days of holding back a flood. His face crumpled, his eyes reddened, and he crossed the room in 3 long strides, dropping to his knees in front of his son. "Tommy." His voice cracked. "Oh God, Tommy." He pulled the boy into his arms with such force that Tommy's feet left the ground. The man's shoulders shook as he buried his face in his son's hair, holding him like he might disappear if he loosened his grip even slightly. "I looked everywhere," Bradford whispered, his voice thick. "Every town, every road, every farm. I thought I'd lost you." Tommy clung to his father's neck, his own tears finally breaking free. "I tried to find you, Pa. I tried so hard." I know you did." Bradford pulled back just enough to look at his son's face, his hands cradling the boy's head. "You're safe now. That's all that matters." The room was silent. Not a whisper, not a breath. Then Bradford's eyes lifted and found Ruth. She stood a few feet away, hands clasped in front of her, feeling suddenly exposed under his gaze. He studied her for a long moment, her worn dress, her work-roughened hands, her weathered but kind face. "You found him," he said quietly. Ruth nodded. "Last night, on the road near my cabin. He was alone in the storm." Bradford stood slowly, still holding Tommy's hand. "And you brought him inside?" "Yes, sir. Fed him. Kept him warm. It was the right thing to do." His jaw tightened, emotion flickering across his face. "Do you have any idea?" His voice caught. He started again. "Do you have any idea what you've given me back?" Ruth's throat tightened. You saved my son's life." Bradford's voice rang through the store, firm and clear. He turned, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. This woman saved my son's life when no one else would. The silence deepened, now heavy with shame. Beatrice cleared her throat, her voice suddenly honeyed. Well, of course, Mr. Bradford. We would have helped if we'd known. You did know, Bradford said coldly. My son came here yesterday, told you who he was, asked for help. His eyes locked onto hers. What did you do? Beatrice paled. There was a misunderstanding. We thought you turned him away. Bradford's voice was ice. Called him a liar. Ran him off. We didn't know for certain. He's a child. Bradford's shout made everyone flinch. A frightened, lost child. And you threw him back into the cold because you didn't believe him. He took a step toward her because he didn't look like you thought he should. Beatrice opened her mouth, but no words came. Vernon stepped forward, trying to salvage the situation. Mr. Bradford, sir, we were just following protocol. We had to be cautious. You understand? Cautious? Bradford's gaze shifted to the deputy. Is that what you call it? We didn't want to bother you with false claims, so you left my son to die in the wilderness instead. Vernon stammered. That's not. We didn't think. No, you didn't think. Bradford turned his attention back to the crowd. But she did. He gestured to Ruth. A woman with nothing. A widow barely holding on to her land. She stopped. She cared. She risked everything to help a boy she didn't know. Ruth felt the weight of every eye in the room. Bradford walked toward her slowly, his face softening. What's your name? Ruth Calloway, sir. Mrs. Calloway. He extended his hand. I owe you a debt I can never repay. She took his hand hesitantly. You don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone should have done. But they didn't, he said, his voice carrying across the room. They didn't. William Bradford didn't release Ruth's hand immediately. He held it firmly, his eyes locked on hers with a strength that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't been years. You will be rewarded for this, he said. Properly, justly. Ruth shook her head gently. I don't need a reward, Mr. Bradford. I'm just glad Tommy's safe. Nevertheless, he released her hand and turned back to face the room, his presence commanding every bit of attention. Let me make something very clear to all of you. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. For 3 days, I've torn this territory apart looking for my son. I've sent riders to every town, every settlement, every crossroads. I've offered rewards, made inquiries, begged for information. His voice grew harder, and the entire time he was here, in Red Creek Valley, walking your streets, asking for your help. No one spoke. My boy came to this trading post, Bradford continued, his gaze settling on Beatrice. He told you his name, showed you what proof he had, and you called him a liar and threw him out. Beatrice's face had gone from pale to ashen. Mr. Bradford, I apologize. If you'd known, you would have treated him with basic human decency. Bradford's voice was dangerously quiet. That's not how decency works, Mrs. Harlow. Kindness isn't something you give out based on a person's station. I was only trying to protect what? Your sensibilities? He stepped closer. Let me tell you what you protected. Nothing. You protected nothing while my son nearly died out there. Beatrice's hands trembled. I made a mistake. A mistake that could have cost me everything. Bradford's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but every word carried. I don't do business with people I can't trust. And I certainly don't do business with people who would let a child suffer. The color drained completely from Beatrice's face. You can't mean your credit line with my ranch? Closed. The contracts for supplying goods to my men? Ended. The land you lease on the eastern border of my property? He paused. I'll be taking it back. But that'll ruin me. Beatrice's composure finally shattered. This store is all I have. Then perhaps you'll understand what it feels like to have everything at risk, Bradford said coldly. To be vulnerable. To need help. He turned away from her. Maybe it'll teach you compassion. Vernon stepped forward, his face red. Now wait just a minute, Deputy Price. Bradford's attention shifted to him. You followed your mother's lead, didn't you? Ran my son off like he was a stray dog. Vernon's hand moved toward his badge automatically, as if it could protect him. I was maintaining order. You were abusing what little authority you have. Bradford looked at Marcus Stone, who stood by the door. Marcus, remind me, who appoints the deputy in this territory? Town council does, sir, Marcus replied. But the council members are all elected by property owners. And who owns the most property in Red Creek Valley? Marcus allowed himself the smallest smile. You do, sir. Bradford nodded. Then I'll be calling for a council meeting. First order of business, reviewing the current deputy's fitness for duty. He looked back at Vernon. I suspect you'll be looking for new work soon. Vernon's face went from red to white. You can't, I can, and I will. Bradford's voice was final. The room erupted in whispers. Beatrice looked like she might faint. Vernon stood frozen, his hand still hovering near his badge. And old Pete stepped forward, his hat in his hands. Mr. Bradford, sir. Bradford turned. Yes, I just want to say, I saw your boy too, yesterday, and I didn't help him neither. Pete's voice was thick with regret. I convinced myself it wasn't my business. But Mrs. Calloway, she made it her business. And I'm ashamed I didn't do the same. Sarah May spoke up next, her voice trembling. I saw him too. I wanted to help, but she looked at Ruth. I'm sorry. You did what I should have done. One by one, others in the crowd began nodding, murmuring their agreement. Not everyone. Some still looked away, unwilling to admit their failure, but enough that the tide had clearly turned. Bradford's face softened slightly. At least some of you have the courage to admit the truth. He looked around the room one final time. Let this be a lesson. Character isn't measured by what you do when people are watching. It's measured by what you do when no one expects anything of you. He walked back to Ruth, Tommy still holding his hand. Mrs. Calloway, I meant what I said. You will be paid back for what you've done. Mr. Bradford, really, please. His voice was gentle now, almost pleading. Allow me this. You have given me back the only thing in this world that matters to me. Let me do something for you in return. Ruth looked down at Tommy, who was watching her with those wide, grateful eyes. She thought about her cabin, her struggling land, the debts that kept piling up. All right, she said quietly. Bradford smiled, the first genuine smile since he'd walked through the door. Good. Then we have much to discuss. He glanced at the crowd one last time. But not here. He placed his hand on Tommy's shoulder and gestured toward the door. Come, both of you. Let's leave this place behind. As Ruth followed William Bradford and Tommy out of the trading post, past the wall of silent riders and into the morning light, she felt something shift inside her. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't walking away with her head down. She was walking away with her head held high. 3 months had passed since that morning in the trading post, and Red Creek Valley looked different now. Or perhaps it was Ruth who saw it differently. She stood on the porch of her cabin. No, not a cabin anymore. William Bradford had been true to his word. In the weeks following Tommy's return, he'd sent workers to repair the roof, strengthen the walls, add a proper kitchen, and build a second room. The land had been cleared, fenced, and stocked with cattle bearing the Iron Ridge brand. Her debts had been paid in full. But more than that, something had changed in the town itself. Doc Ruth was no longer the widow people whispered about. She was the woman who'd saved William Bradford's son. Doors that had been closed were now open. Conversations that had excluded her now included her. Even Beatrice Harlow, whose store was barely hanging on, nodded stiffly when they passed on the street. Vernon Price was gone. The new deputy, a fair-minded man named Coleman, tipped his hat to Ruth every time he saw her. But the greatest change wasn't in the town, or even in Ruth's circumstances. It was in what had been built. Because of that one rainy night, Ruth turned at the sound of hoofbeats and saw William Bradford riding up the trail, Tommy sitting proud in the saddle beside him. They'd become regular visitors, coming by at least once a week, sometimes for supper, sometimes just to talk. Tommy had even started calling her Miss Ruth, with an affection that warmed her heart every time. Afternoon? Ruth, Bradford called as he got off his horse. Afternoon. William. She'd stopped calling him Mr. Bradford weeks ago. At his insistence, Tommy hopped down and ran up the porch steps, pulling a rolled piece of paper from his saddlebag. Miss Ruth, look. Pa helped me draw up the plans. She unrolled it carefully. It was a sketch, rough but clear, of a building. Large, with multiple rooms, a wide porch, and a sign above the door that read, Haven. What's this? Ruth asked, though her heart was already beginning to understand. Bradford joined them on the porch, his face serious but warm. It's a safe place. A place for lost children, for families in need, for anyone who finds themselves alone and afraid with nowhere to turn. Ruth's breath caught. We're going to build it just outside town, Bradford continued. Large enough to house 20 people comfortably. There will be a kitchen, a schoolroom, beds, medical supplies, everything needed to help people get back on their feet. And you're going to run it, Tommy added excitedly. Ruth looked up sharply. Me? Who better? Bradford said. You've already proven you have the heart for it. And I'll provide the funding, the land, the resources. But the Haven needs someone who understands what it means to struggle. Someone who knows how to see people others overlook. Ruth stared at the drawing, her eyes burning. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Tommy urged, gripping her hand. She looked at the boy, no longer the terrified, soaked child she'd found on the road, but still the same sweet soul who trusted her when he had no reason to trust anyone. Then she looked at Bradford, this powerful man who could have simply rewarded her with money and moved on, but instead had chosen to build something lasting. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I'll do it." Tommy whooped and threw his arms around her waist. Bradford smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and crinkled the corners. "There's one more thing," he said, pulling an envelope from his coat. "The deed to the property. It's in your name. Whatever happens, the haven is yours. No one can take it from you." Ruth took the envelope with trembling hands. She opened it and saw her name, Ruth Calloway, written in clear official script. Owner of Red Creek Haven. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for trusting me with this. Thank you for showing me what true character looks like." Bradford replied. That evening, as the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, Ruth sat on her porch with Tommy beside her. They watched the horizon together, the boy leaning against her shoulder. "Miss Ruth," Tommy said quietly. "Yes? Do you think other people will stop for kids like me now? The way you did?" Ruth thought about the haven, about the plans, about the change that was slowly rippling through Red Creek Valley. She thought about Sarah May, who'd started volunteering to help with the construction, about old Pete, who donated supplies, about the people who'd begun to understand that kindness wasn't weakness, it was strength. "I think so," she said. "I think we're teaching them how." Tommy nodded, satisfied, and went back to watching the sunset dot. And Ruth thought about that night 3 months ago, the storm, the cold, the small figure shivering on the road. She'd had no idea that stopping would change everything, that one act of compassion would transform not just her life, but an entire community. She'd simply seen someone who needed help and chosen not to look away. Sometimes that was all it took. Sometimes one person caring was enough to change the world. As darkness settled over the valley and the first stars appeared, Ruth made a silent promise to every child who would walk through the doors of Red Creek Haven, to every person who would find shelter there, to every lost soul searching for hope. She would never stop looking. She would never turn away. And she would teach others to do the same, because that rainy night had taught her something she'd carry forever. The smallest act of kindness, given freely and without expecting anything in return, could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. And sometimes those ripples became waves that changed everything. End of the story.